Okay, so I have quite a few articles for you today because, well, I've let this go about a week without posting. So, let us start with one of the oldest of the articles. Trump administration issues anti-trans healthcare report that recommends conversion therapy. Now, when I first heard about this report, the notifications I got, and this is from mainstream media, only said therapy. In the notifications I was receiving on my phone, not a one said conversion therapy. So when I first read this, I thought, okay, obviously these people don't know what the fuck they're talking. Well, that was obvious anyway. But trans people do go through therapy. This is not something unusual. They go through therapy to make sure they are in fact trans before they go through anything more. You know, they don't get prescribed puberty blockers until there's a pretty good understanding that they're trans. They might socially transition still, but they don't do anything medical until it's determined that they are indeed, and that is therapy. But no, turns out it's conversion therapy, which is a whole heaping helping of bullshit. So, one critic called the hastily assembled review a collection of discredited junk science, which is exactly what it is. Even the father of conversion therapy now says that conversion therapy is shit. And he apologized. Now, it's up to you whether you want to still give him a big fuck you, but hey, at least better late than never. He's come to the conclusion that yeah, what he was peddling is bullshit. Okay. The Trump administration released a 400-page review of transgender youth health care on Thursday that described current best practices endorsed by mainstream medical organizations and professionals as unproven. So they're going to hawk an unproven method that's been defined as torture, but everything that the medical establishment has considered correct, they're considering unproven, because up is down and down is up. Alrighty there. The report advocates for behavioral therapy in place of gender-affirming medical care for youth with gender dysphoria, or what critics call conversion therapy. Now, again, going to therapy is a part of the transition process because that helps to determine whether you are in fact trans or whether there is some other issue, and which is fine. But once you are going to try to convince someone that you are not in fact trans when you are, that's when problems arise. Because making sure a kid is trans is not the same as trying to convince them they aren't in fact trans. Two totally different concepts. Our duty is to protect our nation's children, not expose them to unproven and irreversible medical interventions, said Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, director of the National Institutes of Health and a Trump appointee. Of course he is. We must follow the gold standard of science, not activist agendas. You know, everyone's irony meter must be blowing up every 2 seconds whenever a Trumpian talks, because they usually end up saying the reverse of what is true. I mean, yes, you should follow the gold standard of science. The problem is your idea of the gold standard of science is the exact opposite of what is actually science. So there is that. And irreversible medical interventions, there is literally nothing that children are given that's irreversible. Now, for those who have horrible gender dysphoria, then yeah, probably even before they turn 18, there is more irreversible medical intervention, but that they might go through surgeries. However, or be put on hormones. However, puberty blockers, reversible. Social transition, totally reversible. So, no, they're not getting irreversible medical interventions. And, it's so funny that the people who are pounding their chests and screaming, trust science, are going out of their way to deny science that they don't like and cling on to the crackpots who claim that they can cure transgenders or cure homosexuals or whatever the scapegoat of the day is. It's just insane. Either you believe science or you don't. You can't decide, oh, well, I'm going to believe these crackpots because they have the same bigotry I do. No, that's not how science works. You do not pick something just because it makes you feel good. Science actually follows facts. And these are the same dipshits who scream basic biology as if there's anything basic about actual biology. Because they think that what they learned in their freshman year is all the biology that exists. And that these experts had no reason to take advanced biology classes or something. I have no idea what basic biology people seem to think that they're doing. I mean, it just makes no sense. It really doesn't. None of the contributors to the report's findings were identified. Shocking. A peer review process will be conducted following the review's release, the administration said. Why do I find that hard to believe? I mean, it's entirely possible that actual scientists might get a hold of this and do a peer review, but I find it hard to believe that the Trump administration is going to actually submit it for peer review through proper channels, simply because nobody in the Trump administration can handle being told that they're wrong about something. The report issued by Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Department of Health and Human Services questioned standards for the treatment of transgender youth issued by the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. That organization and nearly every major American medical association and leading World Health Authority have endorsed gender-affirming care as evidence-based, safe, and in some cases life-saving for transgender youth. And what these articles never or hardly ever point out is that gender-affirming care is not just for trans people. When I had a hysterectomy, that was gender-affirming care. When women have to go, well, people, because trans men can have their periods at least up to a certain point. When people get their periods and it hurts like a son of a bitch, when they go through the proper care, like, I don't know, taking birth control, because sometimes that helps, whatever is necessary to make that time of the month at least go somewhat smoother, that's gender-affirming care. When men take freaking Viagra, gender-affirming care. I mean, there is so much that falls under women who have to have mastectomies because they had breast cancer. Well, that's gender-affirming care. So why is it that women can have double mastectomies for breast cancer, but a trans man who desperately, desperately, desperately wants to get rid of his boobs is that's considered being hacked apart or whatever? It's might be for a different reason, but it's the same fucking procedure. So, or women who want to change their boob size, whether it be that they want bigger ones or they need smaller ones because it's killing their back, because they're just not, that their boobs are bigger than they are high or whatever, than they are tall. Hi, Dolly Parton. I mean, there are perfectly good reasons. That's gender affirming care. There is so much that falls under gender affirming care that has absolutely nothing to do with trans people. So, why are we saying that some care is fine and others aren't? That others are butchery? Cosmetic surgery exists, and it's not just because of people who've been in car accidents or a breast cancer or whatever. Cosmetic surgery exists because people want to look a certain way. You know, there's absolutely nothing about changing someone's cheekbones that screams medically necessary, unless it's facial reconstruction, which is totally different. So, how can you claim that? You can't even claim that cosmetic surgery, some is definitely necessary, but not all of it. But that's not, people don't call that butchery. So it's just, ugh. What the administration describes as a new best practices report is in response to Trump's executive order issued days into his second term that mandates the federal government not support chemical or surgical mutilation of children under the age of 18. Which I assume they're talking about puberty blockers. Or they think that kids under the age of 19 are getting hormones and having gender reassignment surgery. Now, first off, why is it under the age of 19? Because 18 is considered the age of majority. You're considered an adult. So if they want to butcher themselves, they have every right to. So there's that. Number two, if you're under the age of 18, none of this is happening. Yes, you are getting puberty blockers, but you know who gets puberty blockers as well? People who go through precocious puberty, which, for those who don't know, is just people who go through puberty way too young. And nobody ever yowled at the medical establishment for doing that for kids under precocious puberty. Nobody. But once it became popular to give to trans kids, suddenly everybody lost their shit. And what was the number one reason? Why are you making these kids incapable of producing? Okay, they can't breed. Not that that's a foregone conclusion, but even if it was, if they had to choose between their mental health and pushing out kids, I'm pretty sure most people would care more about their mental health. So this idea that you're preventing children from being able to reproduce, you're just basically telling on yourself that the only thing you care about with people is if they produce kids. If they don't, they are worthless as humans or something. It's just so messed up. You should care about the quality of this kid's life. And if that quality includes never having kids, then they're just not going to have kids. Not everybody is obsessed with that. Number two, just like patients who go through testicular cancer treatment or ovarian cancer treatment, you know what they do first? If they think that they're going to want to become parents down the road, they freeze their eggs, they remove the sperm so it could be utilized at a later date. The same can be done for kids. Obviously, not those who haven't gone through puberty yet, for obvious reasons. Well, the girls can, because they produce eggs before they go through puberty. So they can freeze their eggs. So just because they're on puberty blockers, even if they do become infertile because of them, there is a recourse. So yeah, this need that you might have to have biological kids is not everybody's need. Everybody has other desires. Some want kids, some do not. And it is not up to you to decide what other people will want. Nor is it up to you to tell anybody that you know better than their doctor, whom will go over such side effects if there is, and whatever the percentage chance of becoming infertile or whatever by being put on a certain medication. Basically letting doctors be doctors, letting them tell you what they feel is the best for you, or just give you a bunch of options. This is what will happen with this. This is what happened with this. This is most likely what will happen with this. And you get to decide which course of treatment you want to pursue. Because that's what doctors do. They do not dictate, or, well, maybe once upon a time they did, but they let you help be a part of this decision. Okay, I think you should do this for this, and this reason, but this, and this will happen. Or if they don't tell you, you can ask, what would happen if I do this? What would happen if I do that? Will I be able to have kids? Will I be able to do this? That is all stuff that you discuss with your doctor, not a bunch of busybodies telling you, oh, well, I read that you might end up infertile, so you shouldn't do it. Okay, maybe that would work for someone you know. If you know for a fact that this person's going to eventually want kids. But if you don't know that, why are you bothering them? Anyway, unlike the disputed Cass report on transgender healthcare in the UK, which took 4 years to complete before it was released last April, the Trump administration's new analysis was completed in just 90 days. Oh, there's a shock. Actually, I'm surprised it took that long. The January 28th order and Trump's genealogy ideology executive order, which asserts there are only two immutable sexes, male and female, have both been used to carry out administrative policies aimed at erasing transgender identity. Trump has ordered the federal government to identify people as either male or female on official U.S. documents, bar transgender service members from the military, and ban transgender women and girls from school sports. Judges are blocking the enforcement of several of the policies, as well as they should. Now, let's go over these, even though I've done this previously. So, about male and female being immutable sexes. Okay, I actually posted, and I've mentioned this before, on the community tab. I think it's just called posts now. That video to Forrest Balkai explaining how this works. That sex is not as immutable as people think. Just because I look like a woman and I don't have any characteristics that somebody might confuse as being male. You cannot assume I have XX chromosomes. I could have some variation. I don't think I do. I have no reason to suspect I do. But you're just guessing, you're just assuming. What about people who have women who have masculine characteristics like a lower voice or protruding Adam's apple? Some people seem to think, oh, a protruding Adam's apple, hello, Ann Coulter, means that they must be trans. Guys, everybody has a flippin' Adam's apple. Men's are usually more pronounced. Like I say, they protrude more, but everybody has an Adam's apple. What the fuck do you think an Adam's apple is? What do you think the function of an Adam's apple is? Because I'm pretty sure that the people who are freaking out just know that an Adam's apple exists, but has absolutely no clue what it's for. You know, they have no clue that without an Adam's apple, you can't freaking talk. So, there is that. Bar transgender service members from the military. Now, let's ignore the fact that the reason why they want to do. Actual service members are saying, what the fuck, dude? They serve just fine. Nobody has a problem with trans people in the military except for transphobes. It's just ridiculous. Trans people have been serving in the military and they've been serving well. Are there some who don't do that great and get washed out? Just like literally any other category, not everybody's going to be suited for the military tries out. That's just the way life works. That doesn't mean that all transgender people are problematic. It just means that just like every other group, there's variation. Ban transgender women and girls from school sports. Like I've mentioned many times before, this is a bit of a gray area. You can't just blanket this, because then you're saying that 7-year-olds can't compete together because, you know, obviously there's a huge difference between what a 7-year-old boy can do and a 7-year-old girl. No. That doesn't happen until post-puberty. That's one of the things that happens in puberty. It's just bizarre. And then, of course, when we're talking post-puberty, not, especially nowadays, not all trans women go through male puberty because puberty blockers. And it's still being, the last I saw on the NIH website, there is some sort of evidence that there is some long-lasting effects from going through male puberty, which I can believe because people who go on cross-sex hormones and then stop, there are certain characteristics that never completely go back to the way they were. So it's entirely possible that there's some inherent advantage going through male puberty. Okay, well, what about the girls who don't go through male puberty? Well, then they don't have that advantage. So why should they be excluded? So yeah, there is so much gray area here that you can't just do a blanket ban. Because then you're just basically admitting that you hate trans people. Because you can't be bothered to look at things on a case-by-case basis. Not to mention, they're obsessed with trans women and girls, but don't give a flying fuck about trans men. Trans men exist. They compete. And they compete well. It's not like, oh, it's just a trans man. It's not like it's someone who can actually. Like Trump makes this super sexist thing. Even his own wife, who I'm surprised she's still married to the jerk, will point out, because he will. Here is a cis woman trying desperately to pick up a bar for weightlifting. It's like, dude, are you seriously telling me all female weightlifters are trans? Because no, they don't have that problem. They can lift up a bar because they're not weaklings. Why? Because women produce testosterone. Now, obviously, they don't produce as much as biological males, but they do produce testosterone. So there is some strength there. And obviously, just like everybody else, everything else, some are stronger than others. All right. As long as they fall into the correct range for testosterone or whatever, it's perfectly fine. They're tested for that. So for Trump to portray cis women as having zero strength is laughable at best and super sexist at worst. And he does this to show that, oh, well, trans women are infinitely stronger than them. And that's also not the case. People like to use the example of Riley Gaines and how she lost to a trans woman. No, she fucking did not. She came in tied with that trans woman for 5th, which means that there were 4 cis women who beat both of them. How is this proof that trans women are succeeding in sports? How that they are preventing cis women from competing and doing well in sports and continuing on with whatever sports streams they have? It's not. So it's just, people will tie themselves in knots mentally just to justify the unjustifiable. So, GLAAD's president, Sarah Kate Ellis, condemned the hastily assembled review as a collection of discredited junk science. This so-called guidance is grossly misleading and in direct contrast to the recommendation of every leading health authority in the world. This report amounts to nothing more than forcing the same discredited idea of conversion therapy that ripped families apart and harmed gay, lesbian, and bisexual young people for decades. And the irony is that the bisexuals are probably the least affected, simply because, well, they can, just show their attraction to the opposite sex because, well, they're bi. But even then, just because you're bi doesn't mean you equally like both sexes. You're going to have a preference, just like most people have a preference of who they want to date. They like certain types of women, they like certain types of men. It's the same thing with bisexuals, only it also includes the sexes. I prefer male, I prefer female, I don't give a fuck. I just want this type of a person, this type of personality. Just like everybody else. The Human Rights Campaign described the HHS report as politically motivated document filled with outright lies and misinformation. No shit, Sherlock. Instead of assessing the actual evidence supporting the provision of gender-affirming care, this report instead attempts to lay the groundwork to replace that best practice medical care for transgender and non-binary people with gender exploration therapy, a focused, tested, and innocuous-sounding name for the debunked, destructive, and dangerous practice of anti-LGBTQ plus conversion therapy that is advocated for by fringe, far-right groups, rejected by mainstream medical and mental health organizations. On Monday, the Trump administration released a progress report on the actions the executive branch have taken to enforce Trump's chemical and surgical mutilation order during his first 100 days in office. The White House said HHS has eliminated 215 grants totaling $477 million for research on education on gender-affirming treatment ahead of the report issued today. Again, gender-affirming care is not just for trans people. Now, I assume that these grants are to study specifically how gender-affirming care helps the mental stability of trans kids. But again, it helps cis kids as well. It's not just for trans kids. All right, so that takes care of that bullshit. Let's move on to some good news. Most of the things I believe I have for you are good news, but like this first article, some of it is shitty news. So, Spokane passes LGBTQ plus rights ordinance to protect trans folk from the federal government, which is great news considering the bullshit I just read. Council members celebrated that the city is living up to its motto, "In Spokane, we all belong." The City Council of Spokane, Washington, has passed an ordinance enhancing protections for LGBTQ plus people with a focus on protecting trans folks. Council members voted 5-2 to implement the ordinance, which updates the city's Human Rights Code to define gender-affirming care and ensure equal protections for LGBTQ plus people. A press release explained that both Spokane Municipal Code and state law already provide protections for LGBTQ plus people, but the ordinance adds language to acknowledge the inherent risks faced by the LGBTQI2S plus community in Spokane, particularly due to federal policies and interjurisdictional legal processes from states that do not recognize LGBTQIA2S plus rights, or are working to deny such individuals access to essential medical care, including gender-affirming care. Okay, now before I continue, I'm sure some of you are confused about the sudden increase in the acronym. Okay, LGBT, I should hope everybody knows what those letters stand for. Q is just simply queer. So you aren't actually labeling yourself any of the other letters, but you don't fit the heterosexual label. So it could be that you're questioning your sexuality, or you're just perfectly fine not labeling yourself at all, but you don't consider yourself hetero, so that's fine. I stands for intersex, because when transphobes go after trans people, they're also attacking intersex people. I mean, they might not be intending to, but they do, because every attack against trans people is implicitly an attack on intersex people, because they also don't fit the binary that people are trying to claim exists in biology. 2S is Two-Spirit, which is a indigenous people's concept. Now, I don't know if let's try this again. I think it was explained to me once that it's not exactly people who are gay, and it's not exactly people who are trans. It's but it's something similar. They embrace the both two sides of themselves. I know I'm not explaining it well because I don't fully understand it myself, but that is a thing. In case you think that this didn't exist until recently, or that you're surprised that not all religions and not all spiritual people believe this transphobic bullshit. It wasn't until Christianity came to this country, to this continent, it wasn't until then that two spirits were actually frowned upon, because it's Christianity that made that a thing. Before Christianity was introduced to the native population, they generally did not give a shit. I'm sure there were some. I mean, I'm not going to say it's impossible, because there are non-religious types who have a problem with trans people. So it's entirely possible that not all indigenous peoples were fine with two spirits, but two spirits were generally revered. Anyway, before I butchered that concept anymore, let's see. The policy prohibits the city from collecting or disseminating information about anyone's sex assigned at birth, unless it's related to a criminal investigation. Exactly. Because otherwise, what is it anybody's business? I mean, was I assigned female at birth? Absolutely. Outside of doing videos like this, or it needing to be, it's a fact that's needed for a legit purpose. Obviously, then yeah, I don't care if people know that, but if it's not a legit purpose, if it's just some gotcha that I want to be able to discriminate against you, so let me see if you're trans. Seriously, why? Except for discrimination, what do you need to know for? Obviously, if it's a criminal investigation, that is useful information. Because, if you do a chromosomal test on a blood test and find out that that you're looking for a male, and then you see a woman running around, you could get confused, so it would help to know that this person is trans. But otherwise, just so you can say, oh, I don't want to have anything to do with you, unless it's dating, in which case a trans person should disclose that they are in fact trans, because some people are weirded out by that. They don't want to be with someone, and I don't mean weirded out in the sense that, ew, I'm with someone who used to be a dude. No, I mean in the sense of whether they expected to have sex. They might not feel comfortable being with someone who might not have had bottom surgery, and they don't want to try it out anyway. There are legit ways of not wanting to be with a trans person without it being horribly transphobic. It's not that you're freaked out that this person used to be the opposite gender. It's just that you just aren't interested in, that you don't feel comfortable being with someone who has certain body parts, which is fine. Perfectly legit. Again, as long as it's not you, trans, but a legit reason why you would not be with certain trans people. Because let's face it, bottom surgery is a thing. So, if they're like, yeah, I'm interested in you, I'm into you, but I don't know about the sex situation. And if that gets cleared up and you still want to be with them, fine. If you decide, well, we'll wait till after you have bottom surgery, oh, you're not interested, okay, forget it. All perfectly reasonable propositions, which none of those in my mind are transphobic. The ew, you used to be this gender. No, that doesn't work. All right. The ordinance also adds a definition of gender affirming care to the Human Rights Code glossary of terms and adds a section requiring city provided health care to cover it. It also requires the Spokane Police Department to keep an LGBTQ plus liaison officer on staff. All great things. All great things. I don't see why the city shouldn't cover. I mean, the city covers other things. It covers a men's stupid fucking Viagra. So why not, provide health care to trans people who need it? They still need health care. They're still human beings. LGBTQIA+S2 plus people deserve the freedom to make their own healthcare decisions and deserve to feel safe in our community, Council member Zach Zappone said in a statement. That freedom and safety are under threat across the country. This ordinance ensures the city continues to protect LGBTQIA2S plus people and that they know that in Spokane we all belong. Someone once asked me why I say LGBT plus so much. Because these articles literally use that acronym. So I am just reading what is in these articles. I mean, I also, in general, refer to the LGBT community as LGBT plus. But most of the time it's because I'm reading what's in the article. I want to thank all the powerful and heartfelt testimony in support of this ordinance that is about supporting safety, freedom, and dignity, added Council Member Paul Dillon. Spokane is a city where diversity is not just accepted, but celebrated. And this ordinance shows our commitment to our city motto that in Spokane we all belong, especially in a time of targeting and discrimination. Council members Jonathan Bingle and Michael Cathcart voted against the ordinance, with Bingle attempting to add 5 amendments, including measures to ban trans people from using the bathroom and playing on sports teams that align with their genders, and to ban those under 18 from receiving gender-affirming care through city insurance. None of the amendments passed. Well, we know who were the 2 that voted against. Okay, all right, 5 amendments. We've already done the gender-affirming thing to death, so I'm not going to mention that. Sports teams we did. Okay, now, obviously this is about trans women because, again, for some reason, nobody gives a flying fuck about trans men. Which on the one hand, I guess is good for trans men because they can go about their business. But on the other hand, it just shows that it's not trans people that they're actually worried about. So, that they just want to attack people. So, in women's bathrooms, there are stalls. Nobody is going in there oogling anybody. Nobody goes into a woman's bathroom to do that. And even if men did that, If men did oogle, they're not dressing as women to do that. They just waltz on in and try to oogle because, in general, they're stronger than women. So it would be harder for women to do much. However, how does this help anybody? And of course, the because they're so afraid of trans women because they see them as just men, they, by trying to prevent trans people from using the correct bathroom, if you do not have I don't know what to call it, a family bathroom, or just a bathroom that's agender that anybody can use. I would think that if a trans man would walk into the bathroom of the women's bathroom, people would lose their absolute minds because the women there would feel unsafe. The men who claimed that they want to protect women would be like, "What the fuck, dude?" Because they would completely miss the problem that these are actually trans men. So they were born women. They were born female, and now they're being forced to use the women's room because they cannot use the men's room because of this stupid law. Like I've mentioned before, I really, really want a trans man to make it into Congress because of that stupid ass rule. Because I want to see people like Nancy Mace lose her absolute mind upon seeing a man in the women's room. Simply because, well, he's just doing what you asked for. Now, I do know in the Capitol complex, they do have bathrooms, communal bathrooms that anybody can use. It's not gender specific. So that, in theory, would never happen, but it would be awesome to see. I actually heard a story. I heard someone mention that Lauren Boebert, who I swear has maybe one brain cell that sometimes functions, saw someone who looked similar to Sarah McBride. It was not Sarah McBride, and Sarah McBride was mocking her incessantly for being like, "Dude, there's literally only one trans woman in Congress, and you cannot even police that correctly?" And she thought that a woman with short hair, just like Sarah McBride, was using the woman's room, so she assumed it must be Sarah McBride. So she went to get Nancy Mace, because we have to get mommy to confront the big, scary trans woman. And it turned out it wasn't Sarah McBride. And so they both are walking out sheepishly because it's like, oh, we didn't have a gotcha moment. I really, really want a trans man in that bathroom. I desperately want, obviously I don't want anything bad to happen to the trans man. I mean, duh. But just for the optics, just to show these absolute twats what they are truly asking for. Because their problem with Sarah McBride is the fact that they know she is trans. This is the one thing about, it's great that she's the first openly trans woman in Congress. That is awesome. I think that there should be more. I think it's awesome. But by being openly trans, she's opened herself up to people who know when they see a trans person to go after her for being trans. I would love for her to have been able to just waltz into the bathroom, everyone completely unaware of the fact that she's trans, because it's nobody's fucking business. Okay, she's trans, but unless she pulls her pants out, which, again, this is the woman's room, so there are stalls. So it's not like anybody's going to be seeing what she has between her legs. So unless she were to pull down her pants and she still has a penis, I fail to see the problem. And again, stalls exist, so nobody would fucking know. So I just do not understand what is the freaking problem. And if you say, well, what about locker rooms? Okay, I've mentioned many times before, I was always uncomfortable in the locker room. I'm a cis woman. I was amongst other cis women taking gym class. I never felt comfortable in the fucking locker room. And I mean, I'm in my 50s now, so I probably wouldn't give a shit now, but at the time, it made me completely uncomfortable. So if you're saying, oh, it'll make people uncomfortable, people are uncomfortable in locker rooms. That's just the way some people are. Some people couldn't give a flying fuck. Some people are perfectly, and some people don't feel comfortable at all, ever. That's perfectly fine. That's just how some people are. This is not about, if we were only concerned about comfort, then we should allow for the women who aren't comfortable changing in a public locker room to have their own private locker room. Obviously, if you're in a public place, that is literally impossible. So people are going to be uncomfortable. That's just the way it is. Some people are just going to be uncomfortable being in a room full of other naked people, which that's fine. Some people just don't feel comfortable. So you can't claim, oh, well, we should care about cis women's comfort. What about trans people's comfort? A trans woman isn't going to feel comfortable changing in the men's room. A trans man isn't going to feel comfortable changing in the women's locker room. There are going to be people who are uncomfortable with something at all points. So why not just make it easier for those who would most likely be attacked? And if you're uncomfortable, well, it's only for a few minutes. Either you get used to it, or that's going to be the worst part of your workout. I mean, I don't know what else to say. During the city council meeting, Bingle defended his position, claiming he doesn't want anyone in the city to be discriminated against, including those who have sincerely held religious, moral, or ethical objections to this. Okay, that's not how discrimination works. Saying that because we do not want to discriminate against religious people's morality, that means that they should be put in a little bubble all to themselves so they don't get to see the things that they don't like. That's not how discrimination works. You do not have the right not to see icky things. I mean, I grew up many times watching on TV, in movies, straight people. Some of them I was okay with. A lot of you will know that generally when I see romance, I check out. But it depends on the romance. And some of them I find just really icky and uncomfortable. I'm not going to go on a crusade and say I don't want to see that. Of course not, because there's more people watching these shows than me, and I'm not going to dictate to other people what they can and cannot like. That's just bizarre. So yeah. If you do not want to associate with trans people, if you don't want to um be friends with trans people, if you don't want to hang out with trans people, fine. But you cannot go to a public place and then demand that only the public you like gets to be in the same space as you. That's not how this works. If you're in a public space, you expect the public. If you don't like certain parts of the public, that's just too damn bad. Don't associate with them. But you cannot tell establishments you must acquiesce to my feelings of ickiness. It's a live and let live situation that I'm totally cool with, he said. I think that's a great idea. Uh-huh. Dozens of people showed up at the meeting to advocate for passing the ordinance. One mother of an adult trans son said she fled to Spokane from Idaho with her son and his wife after her son experienced horrific mistreatment by doctors in Idaho. In Spokane, she said, they found support, dignity, and a welcoming spirit. But she said hostility has been growing in the city in the wake of the federal government's anti-trans policies. We're feeling the fear and stress we thought we left behind, she said. The ordinance, she said, is not just about symbolism. It's about real protections, real care, real safety for people who are just trying to live their lives. Exactly. You know, the people who are like, oh, but there's a religious and moral objection to trans people. Okay. Then don't associate with trans people. Just because you happen to be in the same room as one, which I might add, the people who are freaking out about this have probably run into trans people before and have never noticed, because unless they make it obvious, like say Sarah McBride has, she's announced that she's openly trans, because she wants to be a role model for other trans people. Unless you do that, most people aren't going to know you are trans. I really wonder if Sarah McBride had never come out, if anybody would have been the wiser that she's trans. And I don't think so. I've listened to her. I've seen pictures of her. I do not see anything that would scream, oh, this is a trans woman. Because there's no reason to even look. I mean, yeah, there are some trans people who don't pass as well as others, but Sarah McBride isn't one of them. So the only reason she came out, I think, is to be a role model so people can see what a trans person is capable of. But I saw that she was assaulted shortly after she came out. So she put herself at risk just so she could be a shining example of what a trans person can be. And she got attacked for it. And she probably wouldn't have gotten attacked before she came out, which says a lot. So anyway, yeah. So she was just busily living her life. Everybody was pretty cool with that until they found out she was trans, and then they lost their shit. The people who are claiming, oh, we should just let people live their lives, are the very people who aren't letting others live their lives. When they say we should let people live their lives, what they actually mean is you should let me live my life the way I want, and everybody else has to acquiesce to my desires. Not the way the world works. All right. Oh, wow. I'm only 2 articles in, and I've already spoken for an hour. Nice. All right. So let's get to the third article. And we're back to shit. Tennessee passes law allowing doctors to deny care if it violates their morals. And all I can say is if you're a doctor and you're concerned about your morals in providing health care, then may I suggest a different profession? Because if you are truly following your Hippocratic oath, you would not give a shit who you are providing care to. I have seen in war zones doctors from one side providing help to fighters from another side because that's their damn job. You know, they don't ask for your papers before they provide you with care because it's their job to heal you. It isn't their job to pick and choose who they're healing unless they are in a really bad circumstance, in which case they have to. But it's not because of, oh, well, you're on the opposite side of me, so I don't want to help you. That is not the way things should work. One of the supporters of the bill is a doctor who is very upset that they were asked for their pronouns. How pathetic that you are so thin-skinned that being asked for your pronouns is triggering. So you want a bill that says that you can deny care to trans people because somebody dared be polite and want to know how to address you. I mean, when I would start working somewhere, I would ask my boss how I should refer to them. Not necessarily about pronouns, but should I call you Mr. Whatever? Should I call you boss? You know, all my bosses have been, fine with the first name basis thing with me. But you want to know how somebody wants to be addressed. I heard someone mention that in Australia, at least amongst the lawyers, I think it's amongst the doctors too, there isn't this hoity-toity air about professionals who insist that you must call them doctor or refer to them in a formal manner. They're perfectly fine, especially amongst people in the same office, calling them their first name. How is this any different? Especially if you are a doctor who maybe looks a little ambiguous. It's not that obvious to the person. Are you a he? Are you a she? So I would rather ask rather than be embarrassed that you picked the wrong one. I mean, it's just makes sense. Anyway, this week, Tennessee Governor Bill Lee signed, of course he's a Republican, signed legislation allowing healthcare professionals in the state to deny care to patients if it conflicts with the provider's personal morals, ethics, or religious beliefs. That includes the use of pronouns in a medical setting. Because, pronouns are fucking scary. What the hell? The new law, which applies to doctors, nurses, pharmacists, and insurance companies, went into effect with the governor's signature. I really hope that there is somebody who chooses not to help someone because they're a bigot and watch the heads explode and try to justify why these doctors and nurses should be forced to care for me even though I'm a giant asshat. Now, granted, those same doctors and nurses would still care for them because unlike these whiny man babies, they actually understand what their job is. Okay. The legislation's Republican sponsor is a physician who cited the threat of moral injury posed to healthcare professionals who may not share their patients' personal or religious beliefs. What? What moral injury? I've worked with Christians. I've worked with a Hindu. I've worked with, I don't know, did I work with a Muslim? I can't remember. I have faced zero moral injury, and I'm a fucking atheist. I mean, there were one or two people in one of my jobs that were acting all holier than thou and how you're a great example to the non-believers. And I was just rolling my eyes and thinking, okay, I want nothing to do with this person. I used to get rides from that person. I'm like, yeah, sorry, you lost me. I'm not your meal ticket to heaven. But I did not get all bent out of shape and said I want nothing to do with this person. I either I'm quitting or fire this person or whatever. Mainly because it was a small library and I couldn't avoid this person. So those were my two options. Either force them to fire her, which that wasn't going to happen, or I would quit, which, yeah, that was actually something I was thinking of, but not because of her. But I'm not going to freak out about a moral injury. Okay, some people think differently than I do. All right, fine. I'm just going to try to avoid them because if you think so little of me, then I'm not going to think highly of you either. Patients and providers have rights. Providers should not give up their rights to best serve their patients, Terry said. Wait a minute. Who are you? The law could result in women being denied medically necessary abortions and LGBTQ plus people being turned away for preventative care like pre-exposure prophylaxis or PrEP. Okay, so my dad actually worked with a gynecologist. Well, I shouldn't say worked with, but they were colleagues. And, in different departments. And he was anti-abortion. He was anti-choice. Now, as it so happened that he was in a position where there were other doctors who could perform the abortions, but I could not understand why my dad was still friends with him. Because do your damn job. If your job is, as a gynecologist, to give women health care, sometimes that health care involves abortion. It sucks. It shouldn't have to happen, but it does. So just because you're in denial does not change the fact that your job is to keep this woman alive. And if you choose to let both mama and potential baby die because, oh my God, abortion, what kind of a shitty doctor are you? And PrEP? Why are you even in a infectious disease or STDs or whatever setting that you would lose your shit for PrEP? Again, do your damn job. Your job is to provide health care. It is not to, nobody's asking you to become gay. Nobody's asking you to inject yourself with HIV so you can properly know what it's like or whatever you think is happening. I mean, this ranks up there with people who are under 21 at the grocery store not being able to touch booze. That somebody else has to scan the booze to the customer. What, you think they're going to get drunk by osmosis? Same thing here. Do you think that you're going to catch something through osmosis? In which case, why are you a doctor if you're so worried about catching something through osmosis? Denying care for any reason is a clear violation of the Hippocratic Oath, which prioritizes patients' well being and mandates healthcare professionals do no harm, said Dr. Amy Gordon Bono, a primary care physician in Tennessee. Exactly. Exactly. It's not do no harm unless it's someone you don't like. When legislation is not patient centered, it's morally compromised to begin with, Dr. Bono told WKRN News. Politicians need to stop dictating medical care, and this bill allows politicians to take their intrusive efforts even further to dictate medical conscience. In my opinion, and the way I like to practice medicine, is to honor the patient first. That's where my conscience lies, Bono said. Exactly. Exactly. Why are you going into medicine when there are certain people you um wouldn't help? That is not the way it works. We've seen plenty of school shootings or any types of violence in this country. This is a very violent country. And you always hear about, if they don't die immediately, the shooter being taken to such and such a hospital for medical care. There's nobody there that says you shot up a school. Fuck, I'm not touching you. No, they do their damn jobs, even though this is a horrible person, because they shot up a school or shot up a workplace or whatever it is. They don't pass judgment and say you're not worthy of me helping you. They don't do that because their job is to provide health care. Same thing here. I do not give a shit if you think being gay is a sin. That is your job, to care for people. If you think homosexuality is sin, fine. Nobody's asking you to be homosexual. We're just asking for you to care for a patient. It's really that simple. The so-called conscience clause does not apply in emergency situations or if an insurance provider is contractually obliged to cover the cost of a specific treatment. But it could be used in the case of a healthcare professional asked by a patient to share their pronouns. What? Seriously? That is the scary thing, being asked your pronouns. How fucking petty do you have to be? It's a pronoun. Not everybody it's obvious. I mean, if I'm going to see someone who in my mind is obviously male, I will call him he. But you know what? Generally, when you're talking to a doctor, you call them doctor. You do not say, oh, he or him. You don't do that. Why are you asking? Why do you even need pronouns in the doctor's office? Unless you want to talk about them to other people at the office. You want to, instead of saying Dr. so and so every time, you want to say, oh, he said this, or I guess if you want to make sure that you're not misgendering someone, fine, but why would you even ask their pronouns at that point? But regardless, even if it doesn't make sense to me, what is the big fucking deal? If someone asks me my pronouns, I will tell them. Personally, I would think it would be freaking obvious, but, apparently there are some people who are, that they might look a certain way but feel like a different gender, and no, I don't understand that. But fine. I'm not going to make a big freaking deal of it because it's a pronoun. I would rather they ask me my pronouns than, misgender me. Again, I don't see how that's a possibility. I think it's pretty obvious that I'm a woman. But, considering there are dumb fucks out there who will look at short hair or maybe the fact that I'm wearing pants and assume I must be a guy because I'm not girly enough. I mean, I guess that's possible, but regardless. Okay, someone asks you your pronouns, you tell them. I'm not sure why you're getting all huffy about it. It's not, I mean, again, if they're doing it because they're worried of misgendering you, what's the problem? Anyway, I used the term conscientious objection to describe my position on the practice of being forced to announce my own pronouns, but this was seen as a barrier to patient care, said Dr. Jonathan Shaw, an OBGYN, who testified before the House Health Committee as the bill made its way through the Tennessee legislature. How are you being forced? Someone asked you your pronouns. Just like any other question, you can decline to answer. You can either say your pronouns or say, well, isn't it obvious? I mean, it would make you a dick, but doing this makes you a bigger one. So, there are ways around it. How is this forcing you? It's like saying that so-and-so forced me to explain this term I used. It's a fucking question. Either you can say that you want to answer, or it's, why does it matter? I'm your doctor. You don't need to use my pronouns around me. Whatever. But going this far, I mean, if I was going to him, I would be like, okay, I don't care how good care he was providing me. I'm moving on to someone else. Because what the fuck? And as far as it being a barrier to patient care, well, I guess it's a barrier in the sense that, how can someone feel comfortable asking you a question if you lose your shit over what's your pronouns? The ability to do my job was called into question and human resources were consulted, Dr. Shaw said. The implication was clear. Conscience needs to be limited or consider an alternative career path. I decided to look for a job elsewhere. Good. Look for a job either where everybody agrees with you, or look for a job in a different field where you don't have to worry about, running into people who might ask you something you don't like. Because I'm sure that the hospital isn't going to miss you. I'm sure that if the fact that asking your pronouns was so triggering to you, I'm sure people in general didn't think highly of you to begin with. It's just unreal that grown-ass men are freaking out over pronouns. Tennessee became the 9th state to enshrine a consciousness clause for medical professionals into law. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed similar legislation in April 2023. The anti-LGBT plus organization Alliance Defending Freedom has been an active proponent in the passage of those laws and several others moving through state houses. How those laws affect insurance coverage is a question that's currently under consideration at the U.S. Supreme Court. Last week, the court heard oral arguments in Kennedy versus Braidwood, a case to decide whether the plaintiff's Texas business Braidwood management must provide insurance coverage to employees for PrEP. And I say, why the fuck not? The company claims that doing so would conflict with their religious beliefs because the preventative care encourages and facilitates homosexual behavior. Okay. No, it doesn't. But I was going to use the condom example, but they probably think condoms facilitate sexual behavior. I mean, it's just so stupid. Homosexuality isn't something that people just do because, hey, I've got PrEP. No. People are homosexual. People are gay. And some people, for whatever reason, ended up in a situation where they ended up with HIV. Now, I'm starting with that one. So, okay, so now you're telling that gay person that they can either only have sex with other HIV positive people, or they have to abstain for the rest of their lives because they have HIV. So there's that one thing. And then, oh shoot, I can't remember his name from Starsky and Hutch. His wife and child died from a blood transfusion because they received tainted blood, tainted with HIV. So, what? Even if they hadn't died, even if they were alive now, they wouldn't be allowed to take PrEP because they are facilitating homosexual behavior? They're encouraging it? How? They got tainted blood. It's not like they got it from homosexual behavior. Which, okay, homosexual behavior, I assume, means gay people having sex. Because gay people do other things. Gay people fall in love. Gay people have romances. It's not all about sex. But the fact remains that it isn't just gay people who have HIV. So why are we treating it like this is an STD strictly for gay people? No, it's not. HIV affects other people. You use dirty needles, you can get HIV. That doesn't encourage or facilitate homosexual behavior. It's just so fucking stupid. All right, moving on. Donald Trump says America should forget about the separation of church and state. So nothing says that anti-Christian bias that he's worried about was always about letting Christians run ramshot over everybody else, and not that they were so concerned about true discrimination. They just want to be able to hate the people they want. Trump said that instead of a separation of church and state, he will bring religion back to our country. Religion never fucking left. Religion exists. That's why there is still a fucking religious prayer breakfast. There's a national prayer breakfast. There wouldn't fucking be one if we didn't have religion in this country. Religion exists. Just because not everybody is religious, and not everybody, and that people generally don't want religious people abusing and discriminating others simply because of their religion, is not a bias against religion. It's just saying that you can be as religious as you want. You just cannot hurt other people in the name of your religion because other people have rights too. And most of those people are religious too. Donald Trump signed an executive order yesterday establishing a Religious Liberty Commission at the Department of Justice to investigate present strategies to eliminate threats to domestic religious liberty. During his comments on the order, Trump said that he doesn't know if there's a separation of church and state and that we should forget about that for one time. Of course he doesn't know. He doesn't even know what's in the fucking Declaration of Independence. So of course he's not going to know if there's a separation of church and state. Intelligent people are trying to claim that there isn't a separation. The executive order says that religious liberty is being violated by discrimination or hostility from the government towards people who are just trying to practice their faith. It says that some of these attacks have included ones that infringe upon long-standing conscience protections, prevents parents from sending their children to religious schools, threaten loss of funding, or denial of nonprofit tax status for faith-based entities, and single out religious groups and institutions for exclusion from governmental programs. So basically, religious schools aren't allowed to get public funds. It has to be privately funded. Which, yeah, because we have a separation of church and state. But ironically, he wants to take the tax-exempt status away from Harvard because they dare not to bend the knee to him. While the order doesn't get more specific, many of these could apply to LGBTQ plus rights. For example, adoption and fostering agencies that receive government funding have been restricted in some states from discriminating against same-sex couples. Many on the right see this as a form of religious discrimination, arguing that those organizations are religious in nature and therefore can't place children with same-sex couples, and that denying them government funding is a form of religious discrimination. Trump spoke at a White House Rose Garden event about how the real problem is the idea that the U.S. has a separation of church and state, promising to bring religion back to our country. They say separation between church and state. I said, all right, let's forget about that for one time, he said, according to Politico. They said, really, there's separation. I don't know. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not sure. But whether there's separation or not, you guys are in the White House where you should be, and you're representing our country. And we're bringing religion back to our country, and it's a big deal. Trump has been leaning into Christianity in his second term, going so far as to establish a White House faith office led by a televangelist who promises to send people angels if they pay her $1,000. Yep, the fools are soon parted from their money. During the campaign, Trump claimed to have been anointed by God. And he's also posted an AI picture of himself as Pope, and he claims he wants to be Pope. I don't know what religion he's pretending to be. I don't know if he thinks Christian is just one thing and that there aren't multiple denominations. But I'm pretty sure it's not Catholic. So yes, even though I'm an atheist, I'm deeply offended by that because what the actual hell? Trump has already announced several of the appointments to the Commission on Religious Liberty, including Catholic Archbishop Timothy Dolan of New York, who claimed that allowing same-sex couples to get married would lead to incest. How? How the fuck does that lead to incest? I mean, I guess it's better than bestiality, but still, where do you get that? You think brothers are going to want to bone just because men can get married? Or that women will want to bone their sisters because it makes zero sense. At least it makes a tiny bit more sense than the bestiality thing, because at least we're talking about attraction by siblings, but except for the fact that you have heterosexual siblings who could engage in incest. So again, what point are you trying to make here? Former Housing and Urban Development Secretary Ben Carson will also be on the commission. He repeatedly attacked trans people during his tenure in the first Trump administration, denigrating them in meetings and even issuing guidance on how to spot trans people so that they could be excluded from homeless shelters. And I'm pretty sure that it's about as effective as any other trans investigator who thinks that they can pinpoint who is trans and who isn't. Trump also named Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick to the commission. Patrick has been fighting against trans rights for most of his career and even ordered the state to ignore Obama-era federal protections for transgender students. Television personality Phil McGraw, who will also serve on the commission, The Hill reports. For those who don't know, that's Dr. Phil. Conservatives have long argued that there is no separation of church and state in the Constitution, despite the Free Exercise Clause, the Establishment Clause, and Article 6, all limiting the role of the government in religion and of religion in the government. Not to mention the founding fathers, the people who wrote the Constitution, actually said that there is a separation of church and state. Just read the letter of Thomas Jefferson to the Danbury Baptists. He explicitly mentions that there is a separation of church and state. It's funny how these same people who are screaming they want freedom of religion, also claim that separation of church and state don't exist. You can't have both, because maybe if this was a homogenous country and everybody was not just Christian but a particular type of Christian, maybe that would fly. Maybe you could get away with that. But the fact is that we have different religions in this country. So what if you have different Christians who are offended by the other person for whatever, because there are Christians who are pro-trans rights and who don't have a problem with trans people, and then you have douchebags. I mean, what if you have two different types of Christians and they're fighting each other in court? Which one are you going to side with? Because they're both going to claim religious freedom. Who are you going to side with? It's just beyond insane how you think that we can have religious freedom and not separation of church and state. Because the state can then dictate which religion is right, which is chilling and not religious freedom. Because either you have religious freedom of all religions, or you're going to shove a particular brand of Christianity down everybody's throat. There is no in between. All right, so that is the end of that article. All right, so we have 3 more articles. All right, let's see how long I can make this video. The Supreme Court is about to let religion ruin public education. So, more fun stuff about religion. 2 recent cases suggest that the era of secular schools is coming to an end. Oh, joy. All right. In modern America, religious education is offered in private schools or in a homeschool setting. Public education, by contrast, is secular because the government is not in the business of sponsoring religious indoctrination. But in two cases the Supreme Court heard over roughly the last week, the justices appear ready to throw out public education as we know it and usher in a new era where tax dollars flow to religious schools and religions can dictate what is taught in public classrooms. When the decisions come down, public education may change forever. It'll be non-existent. They basically want to make religious schools the default and get public money. The problem is that public schools have to educate everybody. They can't pick and choose who they're going to teach. Religious schools, on the other hand, if you're the wrong brand of Christianity, if you show signs that you are not heterosexual or cis, if you don't conform to all sorts of rules that, or if you're emotionally unstable, that you would need special education, they can say, sorry, we don't provide that sort of schooling. So they're stuck going to public schools. If this is allowed to happen, then public schools will be able to pick and choose who they can and will not teach. And so the kids who don't conform to whatever these schools want, where do they get their education from? Not everybody can homeschool. Not everybody wants to homeschool. Some people want their kids to be in an environment where they can socialize and learn how to deal with people. In modern America, religious education is offered in private school. Whoops, I read that already. Sorry. On Tuesday, the justices heard arguments in Oklahoma statewide charter school board versus Drummond, a case over whether Oklahoma must fund a religious charter school that carries out religious instruction and hosts religious activities, including Mass. Rather than consider this as an affront to the separation of church and state, 4 Republican-appointed justices appeared outraged at the idea that a state would fund a charter school focused on language immersion or the arts, but not one focused on religious instruction. Without ever acknowledging that the First Amendment Establishment Clause, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, prohibits government-sponsored religion, and several expressed palpable anger that allowing only secular charter schools was a form of anti-religious discrimination. Well, considering the makeup of the Supreme Court, does this really surprise anybody? All the religious schools is saying is don't exclude us on account of our religion, Justice Brett Kavanaugh said. If you go and apply to be a charter school and you're in an environmental studies school, or you're a science-based school, or you're a Chinese immersion school, or you're an English grammar focused school, you can get in. And then you can come in and you say, oh, we're a religious school. And it's like, oh no, you can't do that. That's too much. That's scary, he continued. You can't treat religious people and religious institutions and religious speech as second class in the United States. And when you have a program that's open to all comers except religion, that seems like rank discrimination against religion. Now, on the face of it, you could see his argument. The problem is that we have separation of church and state for a reason. All you have to do is learn a little bit about European history to know what happens when a religion completely takes over. Because that's generally what happens. If you think that church and state would be working in tandem beautifully, well, that did work for the Nazis, I guess. But as you can see, that because I used Nazis as an example, you can see the problem here. It's not going to work well for the average person. unless you happen to completely agree with whatever this religion says and the state says, you should be fine. But most people are not going to agree on either everything or possibly anything. And then, of course, there's this bullshit of all these charter schools that they claim exists. I'm going to go out on a limb and say a Chinese immersion school does not exist. So, anyway. The case comes out of Oklahoma, where state law mandates public charter schools be secular. Nevertheless, the Catholic Archdiocese of Oklahoma City and the Diocese of Tulsa sought to create the country's first religious charter school, called St. Isidore in Seville Catholic Virtual School. It would be an online school that would infuse Catholic teaching in its curriculum and require students to attend religious programming. The Oklahoma Statewide Virtual School Board granted the charter, but Oklahoma's Republican Attorney General Genther Drummond asked the Oklahoma Supreme Court to order the board to reverse course. This is not about free exercise of religion, Drummond has said. This is taxpayer-funded, state-sponsored religious indoctrination. That's what this is. You've just got to call it what it is. I honestly did not see that coming. I probably should have, because, why else would it have gotten this far? But I'm very impressed. I am very, very impressed that a Republican understands the freaking Constitution. Because too many bend the knee to Trump and either don't understand the Constitution or pretend not to understand the Constitution. So it's great to see someone who understands the Constitution and is willing to stand up for said Constitution. The Oklahoma Supreme Court agreed that the charter was illegal because Oklahoma law requires public charter schools to be secular. So the board in St. Isidore appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. Justice Amy Coney Barrett recused herself because she is friends with a law professor who advised the school. The result at Wednesday's oral argument was 4 GOP appointees who appeared ready to usher in a new era of religious public schools, and 3 Democratic appointees who opposed such a move. Justice Chief John Roberts was Chief Justice John Roberts was the only Republican appointee who did not tip his hand, though his questions showed he was skeptical of the argument against religious charter schools. The arguments technically centered on whether public charter schools are indeed public schools or private entities. If they are public, as Oklahoma law defines them, then the guarantee against the establishment of religion is a stronger argument. But if the schools are actually private, as St. Isidore insists, along with the charter board and the Trump administration, then it is harder to argue that private religious entities should not be entitled to the same charter contracts as other organizations. Whether they are public or private, however, the bottom line is that charter schools are taxpayer funded, which means the argument is more broadly over public funding of religious education and whether to integrate religious instruction into state education offerings. Exactly. The whole point of charter schools is that they're taxpayer funded. Religious schools are private schools for a reason. They are not taxpayer funded. They are funded by the people who attend the schools. And I should not have to pay for religious indoctrination. Nobody should be forced to pay for religious indoctrination unless you're going to that particular school. Simply because, yes, I'm an atheist. I wouldn't want anyone religiously indoctrinated, but not everybody believes in that religion. And I'm not just talking Christianity. I mean that brand of Christianity. So they should be able to choose which religion they support. It's really that simple. I don't know why this is so hard for people to wrap their brains around, that Your religion should not be forced on others. If other people want to support your religion, great. You can't force others to do that, though. Justices Kavanaugh and Samuel Alito were the most ferocious defenders of the Catholic charter school, repeatedly suggesting that the only reason one might deny a religious institution tax funding to run a school is anti-religious bigotry. Or the fucking Constitution. Alito went so far as to suggest that the Oklahoma Constitution's requirement to provide a secular public education was based on anti-Catholic animus. Now, I don't know when that Constitution was written, but there was a time when there was anti-Catholic animus, so that is true. However, we still have the fucking First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. This whole position is that your defending seems to be motivated by hostility toward particular religions, Alito said to Gregory Garr, a former U.S. Solicitor General representing Drummond. No, it does not represent hostility to religion. Read the fucking First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Forget the Oklahoma Constitution, the U.S. Constitution. How is this not state-sponsored religion? Garre pushed back. I don't think that the court could treat any prohibition on funding that's similar as simply motivated by bigotry, Garre said. If you did, then I think, frankly, the Establishment Clause jurisprudence with respect to public schools will come tumbling down, which I'm sure is the point. Listening to arguments, it seems possible that that's what Alito and some of his colleagues want. In recent years, the court's GOP majority has increasingly removed the bricks separating church and state, including in the realm of schools. While the Constitution's Establishment Clause used to protect separation, conservative justices seem to have decided that the Free Exercise Clause mandates the states can do nothing to maintain it. Freedom of religion is increasingly the freedom to bring religion into every corner of American life, including public education. Alito also suggested that Drummond was motivated by bias against non-Christian religions because of comments in which he suggested Oklahomans might approve of Christian charters, but not charters by religions that the majority views with suspicion. Garre defended his client as simply stating the political reality of state-sponsored religious instruction. Once you open up government programs and bring people into becoming part of the government and approve one religion, not another religion, or this religion, there's going to be a strife that comes from that, he said. It's frankly one of the reasons why we have a religion clause in the Constitution to begin with. It's sad that he has to explain to a Supreme Court judge why the Constitution exists. Just wow. Kavanaugh pounced on Garre's suggestion that the government picking and choosing which religions got public charter schools could create strife. Well, at least he's willing to admit that that he indeed would only grant charter schools to certain religions and not others. That's refreshing. Instead of this self-righteous bullshit that all religions should be treated equally. It seems like strife could also come when people who are religious feel like they're being excluded because they're religious, he told Garre. I think you're missing a portion of the country when you say strife would not result from that kind of outcome. No, it won't, because not everybody is religious. And not everybody is the same type of religious. As Kavanaugh's comment demonstrated, the Republican-appointed justices seem to feel that in America today, it is religious people who are the victims of discrimination and whose needs are ignored. You know, I'm really curious if that Attorney General, because he's a Republican, I'm going to go out on a limb and say he's Christian. Are you really telling me that he feels strife because his particular brand of religion isn't in a charter school? He's the one bringing up the fucking lawsuit. What the hell? You guys have completely lost the plot here. The Democratic appointees approached the case very differently. They seemed to squarely see public charter schools as public schools, and that Oklahoma had the right to decide that its public schools should be non-religious. Justices Sonia Sotomayor and Ketanji Brown Jackson analyzed, I think that's a word, the situation to a local government that solicits contracts to paint landscape murals on public buildings. If a religious painter proposed a mural full of religious symbols, Jackson queried, would it be a violation of his religious rights for the government to deny him a contract? Would that person say, you are rejecting me as a painter because of my religion? When really what the state is doing is saying we are offering a particular public benefit, and the particular benefit is a non-sectarial mural, a secular mural, and that the extent that you're not wanting that, we're rejecting your proposal? Justice Elena Kagan stressed that in keeping with their faith, religious charter schools might not just teach religious beliefs as facts, but also seek to upend state-mandated curriculums and non-discrimination requirements. Today, St. Isidore's might promise to teach the content required by Oklahoma law, but why couldn't a Hasidic community in New York get the state to pay for a yeshiva that teaches only religious texts in Yiddish, Hebrew, and Aramaic? The attorney for St. Isidore couldn't deny the possibility. Kagan later asked Gary to share what he predicts would happen if the Supreme Court found that states must allow religious charter schools, essentially ushering in an era of public religious schools. But I'll just continue. First, every charter school law and the federal charter school program is unconstitutional because they all require that charter schools be public schools and that they be non-sectarian. So we're dealing with the confusion and uncertainty that's created by that to begin with. From there, Gare predicted some states might end charter programs altogether, disrupting education, while others would push forward and accommodate religious charters. He foresaw fights over whether federal law mandating education for disabled kids would apply to charters deemed to be private. Every aspect of this new education regime would go through the Supreme Court. He predicted litigation over which students can attend, who can teach, can you have a gay teacher, and finally over the curriculum itself. Questions over what can be taught will be mediated not through the local democratic process, but through 9 Supreme Court justices. And that's what I was getting at earlier. Not only can they decide who can come in, but who can work there. I mean, technically, everybody can decide that, but they can't say, oh, you're gay, so you can't work here. Oh, you're pregnant, so you can't work here. And yes, that used to be a thing. I think it actually is still a thing for some places. Because religious private schools can discriminate. So it'll be interesting to see how these people getting bent out of shape that they can no longer discriminate when they become public religious schools. Because we still have discrimination laws, at least for now, until the Supreme Court decimates those as well. This case alone will be a bombshell if the court mandates that states begin funding religious schools through their charter school programs. But this term, the Supreme Court is poised to deliver a 1-2 punch. Last week, the court heard arguments in Mahmoud versus Taylor, in which is considered whether religious parents could opt their kids out of lessons that did not conform with their beliefs. Again, the GOP-appointed majority appeared ready to side with the plaintiffs and allow religious parents to pull kids from the classroom when material they object to is taught. A policy that threatens to create a backdoor through which religious parents have veto power over elements of the curriculum and classroom discussion. Exactly, because if the kids opt out, if enough kids opt out, then the curriculum might be shifted enough that to not offend the religious parents, and then all the kids suffer because they're not getting the proper education because people are afraid of a few religious nut jobs. In any school that cannot accommodate children leaving the classroom and being provided alternative materials, the religious preference of a minority seems destined to dictate the curriculum for all. The likely result is the wide elimination of LGBTQ content. Teachers may fear answering a question about a gay politician, for example, or even displaying a picture of their same-sex partner on their desk. If the justices decide in the next few months to allow religious opt-outs in public schools and the creation of religious charter schools, it's hard to see how public education will not change profoundly. In many districts together, the decisions would likely mean the only publicly funded school options would be either explicitly religious or circumscribed by the religious preferences of certain parents. President Donald Trump, whose administration has argued for the religious interests in both cases, has ordered the shuttering of the Department of Education and threatened to withhold funding to schools that engage in diversity, equity, and inclusion programming. But the president's ability to direct public school curriculum is limited because public education is primarily controlled at the state and local level. Unlike what he's trying to claim, which is why he's trying to shutter the Department of Education. The Supreme Court, on the other hand, can dramatically reshape public education, reaching across geographic boundaries to make decisions for individual districts and schools. When it comes to the religious rights agenda of returning religion to public classrooms, it's not the administration that is to be feared the most, but the Supreme Court. Okay, so that is the end of that article. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to mention about it. So yeah, they're trying to make discrimination the law of the land. Both by getting rid of DEI, actually DEIA, and also mandating that the public be forced to send their taxpayer dollars to religious schools. And again, most people would be fine with potentially funding a religious school for themselves, for their particular brand of religion, but they don't want to do others. And there are plenty of religious people as well who don't want to fund even their own religious schools. They prefer public schools because they understand the value of public schools. So everybody gets to be exposed to other viewpoints as opposed to you must believe this. So there is that. Okay, 2 more articles. Russian forces raid MILFs of Ancient Greece, swingers club over LGBT propaganda. Okay, that is a sentence I never thought I would say. I really hope I don't have to tell you guys what MILF stands for. Considering how old I am, I really, really hope I don't have to teach you guys. Okay, fine. Mothers I'd like to fuck. All right. The patrons were placed face down on the floor. It's just the latest crackdown on queer-friendly venues. Russian security forces raided a capital city swingers club in the early hours of Thursday on suspicion of LGBT propaganda. While it's unclear whether anyone was arrested during the raid, it's just the latest instance of Russian forces using the country's anti-LGBTQ plus propaganda law as a pretext to raid businesses and harass citizens. The venue, named Bazaar, okay, that checks out, was hosting a MILFs of Ancient Greece event. And, ooh, I was right. Why are you... Oh. Sorry, they put a couple of asterisks on fuck, so I'm just like, why? Photos of the raid showed partygoers face down on the floor, but the club's manager said the venue would reopen for business on Thursday night. It was absolutely nothing to worry about, one club employee told Novoya Gazeta, downplaying the raid's seriousness. It was a regular, unscheduled inspection by our state authorities. They identified a number of minimal violations that do not affect the work of the club. That is just sad that people are like, it's just a raid, no big deal. No, it should be a big deal. These should not be happening. This is what prompted Stonewall. In 2024, Russian police conducted at least 42 raids on LGBTQ plus friendly venues across the nation, according to an investigation by independent news outlet Current Time and human rights organization Sphere. Beatings, forced confinement, and sadistic humiliations based on sexual and gender identities regularly occur during the raids. All the more weird that he's like, oh, ho hum. Because, what? What the hell? As many as a dozen individuals rounded up at gay bars in the capital city in early December 2024 were found guilty of hooliganism by a Russian court and sentenced to administrative detention. The raids occurred at least 3 nightclubs in the Russian capital, including Arma, Inferno, and Mono. Video of the incidents showed heavily armed men shouting orders at clubgoers seated on the floor with their hands over their heads. Young men at the Mono nightclub were handed military draft notices by police, according to one source who spoke with the news outlet Vyortska. I can do that. Police in Moscow raided 2 gay clubs in October 2024, detaining over 50 people. Images from the arrest showed masked police officers storming into the downtown club's Central Station and 3 monkeys, shouting at patrons and forcing them to lie on the ground. Yes, because nothing says legit like police officers being masked. In February 2024, security forces swept into a party in the city of Tula and dragged feminine-looking men out into the snow and beat them. The party's description as a night of love, openness, and sexuality was enough to attract authorities and get the event shut down. In November 2023, Russia's Justice Ministry described the international LGBT public movement as extremist. That same month, Russian forces conducted multiple raids on LGBTQ plus bars and other establishments in cities, arresting multiple people and charging them under the country's anti-LGBTQ plus laws. Following a similar raid on a nightclub in the city of Orenburg, in March 2023, the venue's art director and administrator were both charged with being members of an extremist organization. Russian authorities even raided and shut down a convention celebrating My Little Pony after deeming it LGBT propaganda. My Little Pony? Oh, wait. My Little Pony has rainbow mane. That's gotta be it. I swear, the only people who think that the rainbow equals gay are homophobes. because gay people understand that not all rainbows have anything to do with gay rights. Some people just fucking love rainbows. And especially little girls love rainbows. What the hell? So I really would love to know what LGBT propaganda this nightclub, this latest raid was supposedly. I mean, what is it about mothers I'd like to fuck screams homosexuality? It screams horny young men. It does not scream homosexuality to me. Horny young men who want to fuck older women. I'm not sure where you get LGBT propaganda from that. The country's building an electronic registry of LGBTQ plus citizens, and a Russian tech company has been helping hunt down LGBTQ plus business. So that's great. All right. So let's go with something slightly different. It's still the government being shitty towards the LGBT plus community, but this is a good news story. Maine settles lawsuit against USDA over $3 million in school funds. And this is from the Portland Press Herald. The Department of Agriculture agreed it will not interfere with Maine school funding based on alleged Title IX violations without following the proper procedure, according to a settlement announced Friday. Just think about that for a second. Oh, we're not going to do anything illegal. I guess, since you're forcing us, we'll follow the law. I mean, just think about that. Our government is to the point where they have to be forced to follow the fucking law. The U.S. Department of Agriculture and Maine have reached a settlement in a lawsuit over the agency's decision to freeze about $3 million in federal funding to the state because of a disagreement over transgender girls participating in sports. Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rollins announced in March that she would freeze funding to Maine education, saying the state violates Title IX because its student-athlete policies allow transgender girls to compete on girls' sports teams. The announcement said the freeze would not affect any food programs for students, only administrative and technological costs. But the State Department of Education said it was unable to access funds for administrative staff that oversees nutrition programs. Well, there's a shock. You mean they didn't do what they said they would? Who would have guessed? Maine Attorney General Aaron Frey filed a lawsuit in early April seeking a temporary restraining order to restore funding. In the settlement signed Friday morning, the agency agreed not to freeze, terminate, or interfere with the state's access to USDA funds based on the alleged Title IX violations without going through the legally required process. Frey and Governor Janet Mills celebrated the news at a Friday afternoon news conference in Augusta, saying the USDA has backed down. It's good to feel a victory like this, Mills said, appearing exuberant as she declared that the state had won this court battle with the Trump administration. I stood in the White House, and when confronted by the President of the United States, I told him I'd see him in court. Well, we did see him in court, and we won. The governor said the federal agency froze money that helps to feed 172,000 children in Maine without any due process, without any rationale, and without any congressional authorization. Maine had no choice but to bring suit to confront this unlawful action by the USDA, Frey said during the brief remarks. This lawsuit is necessary to hold the USDA accountable under the law, and the settlement confirms that the funding at issue is not to be frozen unless the USDA actually follows the law. In its lawsuit, Maine argued that the USDA was preventing students from being fed, that Rollins had not provided a legal basis for her interpretation of Title IX, and that the agency did not follow the federal rules for revoking funds. The agency responded that it had frozen just $3 million, not enough to warrant an emergency temporary restraining order. But a federal judge granted the state's request on April 11th, temporarily stopping the department from cutting or pausing funding. A spokesperson for the department did not respond to questions about the settlement Friday. The USDA matter is just one of several ways the Trump administration has attempted to pull education funding from Maine over the alleged Title IX violations. A lawsuit against the Maine Department of Education, announced by U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi on April 16th, threatens to pull future and retroactive federal education funding, which primarily supports students with disabilities and low-income students. That lawsuit is ongoing. Now, say what you will about trans girls in sports. Whether you agree, whether you disagree, whether you are like me and you understand its nuance, harming the general student population just to get the governor to bend the knee is disgraceful. It's disgusting. Mills declined to answer questions Friday about that lawsuit, except to say she's confident the state will win that case too. That's a separate complaint they filed a few weeks ago. It's only a one-page complaint that cites no authority, no case, no law. We'll see them in court on that one as well. She wouldn't say whether she had discussed changing state law or the Maine Principals Association policy that allows transgender student athletes to compete on the team of their choice, but not both. Mills has previously said the subject was worthy of discussion. Asked if she expected the Trump administration to continue making similar threats, Mills responded, "I can't tell you what he's going to do from one day to the next. Can you? These bullying tactics we will not tolerate them," she said. Okay. This is, that's the end of that article. So, yeah, at least good stuff. I mean, it doesn't look like, I'm unsure whether this is a Supreme Court ruling or... It does say they reached a settlement, so I doubt it went to the Supreme Court. So I don't know. I think that this is done. It's a done deal. That there's no other recourse. They've come to a... Now, they could always attack her for something else. I mean, this is the Trump administration, and Trump is anything if not is nothing if not petty. So, more issues might arise, but as of now, at least that lawsuit is dealt with. I believe I've talked enough this video. I am well over 2 hours, which I did not expect. And if you're still watching, let me know if you prefer me to do these long form videos or if you'd rather I spam my channel with like 6 or 7 shorter videos and doing an article per, or maybe 2 or 3, but not 7. I would love to know your thoughts on that. So with that, I will see you guys in the next video.